Well, welcome everybody. It's great to see this kind of turnout. So we have a fairly good sized advisory group in general, and I think we have a number of folks just joining us to understand where we're going with this study. So this is the first inaugural meeting for the advisory group for TEINA. So it's our loving name for the Transportation Electrification Infrastructure Needs Analysis. It's work that we're doing to comply with the Governor's Executive Order on Climate that came out earlier this year, and really focused on the gaps in addressing barriers for electric vehicle or transportation electrification charging. So you'll hear a little bit more about what the study's about, why we're undertaking it, and what it's going to entail. So welcome, everyone, first and foremost. My name is Amanda Peets. I'm the director of the Oregon Department of Transportation Climate Office. So we're charged with implementing the executive order directive and pursuing the TEINA study. We've got a great consultant team and others on board to help us throughout this, and there'll be introductions shortly. So next slide, Stacey. So a little bit about why you're here today. So we formed an advisory group really to help us make sure that we're considering things. There's a lot of considerations within transportation electrification in total. We have a pretty diverse state with rural areas and urban areas, suburban areas, frontier communities, and we have a diverse population. And so we need to make sure that we're considering the needs of all users, making sure our frontline communities, communities of color, Indigenous, Black, and others can access the charging infrastructure. And so we invited you all around the table as advisory group members to really help provide your perspective. So we have members including people from utilities, local governments, nonprofits, and the auto industry. So we wanted to thank you for your willingness to participate and take the time in this effort. We'll talk a little bit later about the time commitment involved. But the point is to really hear from you, hear that equity voice, hear the perspectives out there about what we need to consider and how we balance things as we move forward. So thank you so much for participating. I'll turn it over to Stacey to review the agenda.
We have a lot to cover today for this group. We're going to be hearing about the project to get you grounded in that. Provide an advisory group overview. You were all sent a roles, responsibilities, and meeting protocols document that we'll be reviewing with you today. We're going to be talking about electric vehicle charging in Oregon before we break out into some small groups. We're going to break out into 4 small groups today, and you'll have a couple members of the project team with you. We're going to be taking public comment. Those who we know, we have a lot of people on the phone today from the public. So if you're going to make a comment, I'm going to show you how to do that in a few minutes. And then we'll be reviewing next steps and wrapping up. So for those of you, we were just talking about everyone being so versed in these online platforms now. I wanted to let you know if you haven't used WebEx recently. Along the bottom, you'll see a toolbar with mute, start or stop your video, share your screen, which you don't really need to do, and leave the meeting. Where you pull down participants, you can see participants and chat along the bottom as well. Those are going to be big for you today. Participants will show you everyone in the meeting, and the chat function will allow you to chat questions throughout the meeting. If you have a question as we're going along, please put it in that box so we can see it and maybe address your question or stop and answer it. We're asking that members of the public just wait till the public comment period to make comments or ask questions. This meeting, we really need to hear from the members, but we do have that time to hear from you later in the meeting. So for participants, for members of the committee, you can see how to raise your hand. If you pull the participants up, you'll see your name, and by your name, there'll be a hand. You select it and it will turn a color, and that means your hand is raised. Alexander is going to be watching for that today. I'm presenting and can't see that very easily. So he will be letting us know, speakers, if we have a hand raised. And then you can mute and unmute yourself there as well. I'm going to be asking everyone to do that quite soon. Unmute yourself and then remute yourself for introductions, including the, the public. I think there's a lot of people. We're going to just chat. If you are here from the public, please chat your name. But I'm going to ask you to do that in a second with one more instruction. So if do you see any questions on this, Alexander? I'll go to the next slide. Doesn't sound like it.
I do not, no.
Okay. And we do ask that everyone, we can mute you from our end, but if everyone can stay muted unless you're speaking, that would help the sound quality. So Amanda, we're going to go around and do roll call introductions. Did you want to say anything else? You introduced yourself earlier, but do you want to say anything else?
Sure. The only thing that I would say is my role in the advisory group is to help facilitate the conversation, and I'll talk a little bit more about what that entails later. But just again, appreciate everyone that's here. And the only thing I didn't mention earlier is that this meeting, because it's the first one, we'll be talking to you a little bit more than we normally do. The point is to listen to your feedback as we review materials and things like that. So really appreciate, again, you engaging in the conversation, and I'll turn back to Stacy to introduce the rest of the committee members.
Thanks, Amanda. I'm actually going to introduce myself because I feel strange talking so much and not being introduced. So I'm Stacy Thomas. I'm with HDR. I'm part of the consultant team, and I'm leading the engagement task, and you'll hear more about the engagement from Mary later. But I'm going to start with the roll call now. If I can ask you, I'm going to go down this list. Unmute yourself. I'm going to just call you by your first name. You can unmute yourself and talk about what your role is at your organization, who you represent. So first up is Greg.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Greg Alderson. I work on transportation electrification policy and other environmental policy work at Portland General Electric.
Thomas. Thank you, Greg. Thomas.
Good morning. Please call me Tom.
Okay.
I lead policy and market development for Greenlots. If anyone is unfamiliar with Greenlots, we're an EV charging software and solutions provider.
Thank you, Tom. Philip.
Good morning. I'm Phil Barnhart. I'm the founder and president of the Emerald Valley Electric Vehicle Association, which is a chapter of the Electric Auto Association. Electric Auto has 80 chapters around the world, most of them in the United States, and it's dedicated to the process of educating the public about electric vehicles and helping to improve adoption. We're all volunteers, nobody's paid, and we don't recommend a particular. This year, we are also doing our own initiative toward the legislature, working on policy. And I have several bills in preparation with my successor, Marty Wilde, from House District 11. I served in the legislature for 18 years.
Thank you, Phil. Welcome. Chris.
Hi, good morning. I'm Chris Chandler. I'm the Public Affairs Manager for the Central Lincoln People's Utility District, PUD. There are 6 electric PUDs in Oregon. Central Lincoln is the largest. And I also have a separate business card that has me listed as an EV specialist. I've driven, at this point, over 150,000 electric miles between 4 EVs. So I'm pretty passionate about it.
Thank you, Chris. And Marie Dodds, I believe, is not able to attend. Oh, Marie,
I'm
are you
here?
here? I see.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I cannot see anybody as a presenter. So welcome, Marie. Take it away.
Hi, good morning. Marie Dodds, AAA Oregon, Idaho. We represent about 750,000 drivers here in Oregon, a growing number of whom are driving electric vehicles. As part of my job, I get to test drive vehicles every week. In fact, Tuesday is my swap day, so I'll be getting a new one today, and I'm getting more and more electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids. AAA also does a lot of research on electric vehicles geared towards consumers. For example, in the last year, we did a study on range, what your actual range is compared to published range. And our goal is to be the trusted source of information on electric vehicles for consumers.
Thank you. Judge Farrar.
Good morning. My name is Liz Farrar, and I am the county judge out here in Gillum County in Eastern Oregon.
Welcome. Ingrid.
Hi. My name is Ingrid Fish. I work for the City of Portland's Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. I work on sustainable transportation with a focus on emerging mobility policy. I'm here with my with Alan Bates, who's the city fleet manager. Purchasing manager for fleet, and we're going to tag team this effort together. Thanks for having us.
Great. Welcome to both of you. Do.
Good morning, Stu Green, City of Ashland. We have a municipal electric utility down in Ashland. I'm the climate and energy analyst for the city. So I work on transportation electrification quite a bit. We recently just upgraded our public charging, which is great. Looking for a lot more opportunities. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Jamie.
Good morning, everyone. Jamie Hall with General Motors. I'm on our energy and environment policy team and work primarily on electrification and EV infrastructure and EV incentives and sort of all the things we need to do from a policy standpoint to make this happen more quickly.
Thank you, Zach. Is Zach here? It doesn't seem so. So Joe.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was on mute.
Oh, Zach, go. Yes, welcome.
There's always one of us.
It's usually me.
Good morning. Zach Kinkin with the Cadeo Group. I'm a transportation and energy consultant.
Welcome. So Joe.
Hi, I'm Joe Hull with Midstate Electric. We're one of 18 electric co-ops in Oregon. We are in Central Oregon. We serve a large area south of Bend. And I do the energy efficiency programs, net metering programs, and our EV program.
Thanks, Joe. Welcome. Juan.
Good morning, everybody. This is Juan with Eugene Water and Electric Board. We're electric and water utility, and my role is to work on energy efficiency and electrification efforts, including transportation electrification. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. V.
Good morning, everyone. My name is V. Pekar, and I'm with Climate Solutions. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Oregon Transportation Policy Manager there. And I work on transportation electrification and thinking about transportation electrification as an equitable and holistic system. So thinking about everything from reducing air pollution burdens to low income and communities of color that are disproportionately burdened by air pollution, thinking about how to plug in workforce development, and prioritizing transportation justice.
Wonderful. And V, thank you for the reminder. I did want everyone to let me know their pronouns. We also want you to sign in since we don't have a sign-in sheet. If everybody, all the members here could put their name in chat. We have this recorded and I see you, but if you could put your name in chat and put your pronouns there, that would be great. Thank you, everybody. Up next is Corey.
Good morning, everybody. Corey Scott. I'm the Managing Director of Customer Solutions at Pacific Power in Portland. And in that portfolio is energy efficiency, demand response, our voluntary renewables program, and all of our EV programming.
Thanks, Corey. Charlie.
Charlie Tracy could not be with us today. He's stuck in a board meeting. I know he'd rather be here with us. I'm Ron Rasmussen. I work with him in the engineering department. Oregon Trail Electric is based out of Baker City. Our distribution ground covers from Elgin down south to Burns. Glad to be here.
Well, thank you for being here for Charlie. Dexter. Dexter, are you here? Amanda, do you happen to see him? Nada.
I do not see him, no.
Okay. Well, I think we're ready to move to our project team introductions, and I'm going to ask us all to do the same thing. We're going to start with Mary. To unmute yourself and
Hi there, I'm Mary Brazel. I'm the Transportation Electrification Program Manager in the Climate Office at the Oregon Department of Transportation, and I will be the project manager on this study.
Mary. Zachariah.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Zachariah. I am a sustainability planner with ODOT's Climate Office and helping out with this study.
Thank you. Jessica.
Hi, Jessica Rikers from the Oregon Department of Energy, she, her, hers, and I am a project advisor for this work.
Wonderful. Wayne.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Wayne Kittleson. I'm a principal at Kittleson and Associates engineering firm and a member of the consultant team that is working with ODOT on this project.
Thank you, Wayne. You've met me. And Alexander?
Hi, I'm Alexander Nelson. I'm HDR with Stacy, and I'm helping with the strategic communications for this project.
Chris.
Hi, I'm Chris Nelder. I head up the grid integration work for Rocky Institute, and
Thank you. I'm going to ask whoever's unmuted to mute because we can hear some background noise. So maybe check to see if you're muted. Lynn.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Lynn Daniels. I'm a manager at Rocky Mountain Institute in our carbon-free mobility practice.
Thank you. And Rhett. Is Rhett on the line today?
I am. Good morning, everyone. Rhett Lawrence, Pacific Northwest Policy Manager at Fourth.
Great. Wonderful. Thanks, Rhett. So that's your team, everyone. I wanted,
Can you introduce Britta Gross, since she's here as well from Rocky Mountain Institute?
Britta, thank you. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, Britta Gross, Rocky Mountain Institute, where I lead the mobility practice. I come with a couple decades of experience out of industry in the automotive sector. Glad to be here.
Thanks for coming, Britta. So for public attendees today, I wanted to let you know, because same for the members, we don't have a sign-in sheet. We'd like it if you could put your name in chat. Please, you can also put your pronouns there. And yes, if you intend to provide public comment today during the public comment period. We just want to get a sense of how many people are intending to make comment. You can change your mind either way. We're not going to hold you to it now. But if you could put your name and yes, if it's no, you don't have to write anything. But yes, if you want to make public comment. Also wanted to let you know that we are accepting public comment in writing. If we receive it the day prior to this meeting, we will read your comment during the public comment period. And you can get those comments to the team by emailing Zachariah, and his email is down on the screen here. We can also stick it in chat. Maybe you could do that in a bit. Alexander, once everybody has kind of signed in, we can put his email up so you guys can grab it from there. Also, we're going to ask the public today to not do a lot of chatting or hand raising, allowing the committee to be able to do that during this time and really holding your comment to the public comment time at the end of the meeting. Okay. And again, speakers and presenters team today, Alexander is going to be keeping his eye on the hand raise and the chat box and interjecting if there's questions. So please expect that from Alexander today. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Mary, our fearless leader, to walk you through the project overview.
Hi there. I wish I could offer everybody some virtual coffee since this is bright and early this morning. So I'll try and be energetic in my comments. So, and I'll try and make up a little time. We're a little bit behind time. So I just like to take a moment, though, first to reflect on the context for why we're undertaking this study now. In Oregon, transportation is the single largest source of greenhouse gas emissions, contributing about 40% of our state's GHGs. And light-duty cars and trucks account for over half of the transportation sector's greenhouse gases. So really, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the transportation sector in a meaningful way, cars and trucks in Oregon increasingly will need to be fueled by electricity, as will other modes of transportation, from buses to delivery vans, freight trucks, to e-bikes. So recognizing this, in 2019, the Oregon legislature enacted Senate Bill 1044, which set zero-emission vehicle adoption targets for light-duty cars and trucks. You can see the goals of this on the right side of the slide. For 2020, 50,000 ZEVs is our goal for registered vehicles this year. In 2025, it's 250,000 ZEVs, and this increases over time over the next 10 years to achieve a goal of 90% of new vehicle sales being ZEVs by 2035. So convenient, accessible, and reliable charging infrastructure is really critical to accelerating adoption of ZEVs. And recognizing this, in March of this year, Governor Brown issued Executive Order 2004, directing state agencies to take actions to reduce GHGs, and the Oregon Department of Transportation is directed by this executive order to conduct a transportation electrification infrastructure needs analysis, which we're calling the TEINA study because it's just way too many words to say over and over again. So the TEINA study is directed to look at charging infrastructure needs that are statewide, with our primary focus on light-duty cars and trucks to support the state's ZEV adoption goals. So we're going to be taking a deep dive into light-duty cars and trucks, but we're also going to consider all vehicle types and use cases as directed by the executive order. And so we'll undertake a little bit of a higher level overview of charging infrastructure needs of electric delivery vans, school buses, transit buses, freight, and e-bikes. Special attention is to be given to the needs of rural areas and disadvantaged, underserved communities. And we're seeking lots and lots of input and advice from other state agencies, from public utilities, from this advisory group, and from stakeholder outreach and the general public. The TEINA analysis is due to the governor's office by the end of June 2021, so next year. Next slide.
So Mary, real quick, I saw that Mr. Barnhart had a question about what about electric trains. So just to reemphasize Mary's point that I think the focus is on light-duty vehicles primarily, but that we are going to look at transportation electrification more broadly. I don't know, Mary, if you want to speak to his point specifically.
Yeah, for the most part, we're trying to look at roadway vehicles, not off-road vehicles like forklifts and ground service equipment and that sort of thing. We're sort of keeping it banded to on-road vehicles. Okay, so we've got a talented, experienced consulting team here to help us on this study, but it's a challenging study because we're looking at charging infrastructure needs into the future and for some types of vehicles that aren't even commercially available yet. And trying to discern what types of infrastructure would be needed, in what numbers, in what areas, to both facilitate and enable ZEV adoption of light-duty vehicles, cars and trucks, and also to ensure that other forms of transportation electrification are supported by charging infrastructure. So really, we view this study as developing a vision of the charging infrastructure needed to meet Oregon's transportation electrification goals over the next 15 years. And we'll be assessing the unique needs, though, for charging infrastructure to support transportation electrification in all parts of the state, benefiting all Oregonians. And we'll be developing policy options to expand the charging infrastructure available in Oregon and position the state to pursue a strategic implementation plan. But before I go into a deep dive into how we'll undertake this study, I want to highlight a couple of things that the study will not do. This study is not going to be identifying specific sites and precise locations for electric vehicle or transportation electrification charging infrastructure. That's kind of the next level down. This is a higher level look. We will also be focusing on policy concepts to address the challenge of charging infrastructure, but we won't be considering policies to address all the different barriers to electric vehicle and transportation adoption and transportational electrification. So we're trying to keep somewhat focused on charging infrastructure. With this foundation, let's explore a little bit of how we're going to conduct this study and where we're going to need your input and advice. And this is going to go into the weeds just a little bit, but it'll give you a better foundation and picture and to understand the big picture. So we're going to start with a baseline understanding of existing conditions of charging infrastructure throughout Oregon, and we'll be getting a little bit of a look at that later on in this presentation. We will want and do want any studies, any data that you have that shines a light on current electric vehicle or transportational electrification charging infrastructure, the installed base, usage, future projections. We want all of that information to better inform our study. We'll be scouring the literature for information as well, but especially from our advisory group and from the public, any information you can share will be great. We'll take into all kinds of consideration the factors that influence when and where charging is going to be occurring and may need to occur in the future. We'll look at challenges that are unique to rural areas, travel corridors, urban areas, disadvantaged communities, and we'll take into consideration a host of other factors that would affect demand for electric vehicles starting from the current ZEV registration data and transportation electrification adoption by geography. We'll look at travel patterns, dwell time, land use data, all kinds of other things, to help inform this. In particular, to develop demand, we're going to build up that view by looking at 9 specific driver and use cases in order to really have a good sense of what's going to be needed, by whom, driving what, over the next 15 years. And we'll be conducting some independent research with stakeholders to better understand their concerns about charging gaps, needs, challenges through stakeholder listening sessions. But I'll be getting into that a little bit later. The 9 specific driver and use cases that we'll explore include the unique needs for charging infrastructure in rural and urban areas, along corridors, mostly for light-duty charging, in disadvantaged communities, and we'll be looking at ZEV and TE use in local commercial and industrial vehicles, principally for delivery, transit and school buses, transportation network companies like Uber and Lyft, long-haul trucking, and micromobility. Then we're going to develop 3 scenarios that forecast the number, type, and areas where charging infrastructure will be needed in the state at 3 points in time, 2025, 2030, and 2035, that mirror the ZEV adoption goals in Senate Bill 1044. The scenarios will bracket a base case and encompass kind of a speedier pathway and a slower pathway to achieve light-duty ZEV adoption targets, and what the medium and heavy-duty and micromobility sectors will look like under each pathway. And we'll be seeking your input to build these scenarios and understand these kind of narrative scenarios of what the world will look like that will guide these forecasts. And we plan to discuss findings and development of these scenarios in our January advisory group meeting. Rest assured, the scenario development will take into consideration a host of factors too, from technology, evolution to consumer preferences, to charging costs, demographics, state of the economy, and the economic effects of COVID-19. When we've identified the scenarios illustrating charging gaps and needs, we'll focus on policy options that will help reduce barriers to charging infrastructure and encourage investments. We want investments from the public sector, from utilities, the private sector, and we'll explore policies that'll be affecting both infrastructure needed for light-duty, zero-emission vehicle adoption, and all other modes of transportation electrification. And again, we'll want your advice on those policy options and implications, which we'll be discussing in our March advisory group meeting. We'll put all these analyses together into a draft report for the governor's office, which is due by the end of June, but we'll have a draft available at the May meeting, and we'll aim to discuss the draft at this time and have plenty of time to incorporate your comments. We've already planned a supplemental effort to provide an overview of a hydrogen pathway. Using the study's existing ZEV adoption forecasts, we'll be examining what it would take to provide hydrogen refueling infrastructure to support a certain percentage of ZEVs that are powered by hydrogen fuel cells, which is likely by 2035. So next slide. So this gives you just a kind of a breakdown by month of the project schedule that kind of goes through the different activities that are underway, from literature review and existing conditions assessments and future trends and modeling scenarios, which are both going to be going on. We'll be discussing much of that effort in January. Looking at policy options and investment actions, we'll be looking at that in March, and again, the draft report by early May. Next slide. So stakeholder engagement, there's a lot of different ways that we're undertaking a number of engagement and outreach activities. We're truly seeking input from a wide range of parties to help make sure that we can understand what's needed to ensure that all Oregonians throughout the state are supported with both ZEV light-duty charging infrastructure, and also the infrastructure is in place to enable an evolution of other modes of transportation electrification. So we appreciate your input from our advisory group. That's one level of engagement. We're also intentionally reaching out to a dozen different specific stakeholder groups with whom we'll be conducting listening sessions to make sure we're capturing the concerns and the aspirations and the needs of unique stakeholder groups, which are listed here with low-income disadvantaged communities, both in urban and rural settings, developers, residents and owners of multi-unit dwellings, the farming and ranching community, as well as industry, transit and school bus, rideshare, which are Uber and Lyft, and electric micromobility, OEMs, automakers, and EV charging company manufacturers and network providers, and the heavy-duty sector and medium-duty sector in freight and delivery. So other outreach that we'll be doing is we're going to be reporting to you on our findings from these listening sessions in January, but we'll be also drafting stakeholder e-blasts that come out to you throughout the study effort, and posting fact sheets and meeting materials on our website, and welcoming public comment. So we've got an ambitious job ahead, but we're so pleased to have the advice and input of the advisory group to help us. And I'd like to open it up for comments or questions if we have any more time.
If anyone has questions on the overall study and the direction that we're heading with this, please raise your hand. As you're looking for that raising your hand option, so again, if you click on the participants piece and then you hover over your name, you'll see a raise hand function. So it looks like we have a few hands raised. So I'll turn to Stacey or Alexander to manage how we want to call on people. But real quick, I also just want to emphasize we do have a mind on the end product here and how we can make it of use to facilitate transportation electrification in the state. So really helping us to figure out, as we have more money coming to the state or create new investment programs, where can we focus those most effectively? How can we address some of the charging deserts out in rural areas and make sure that all people have access to charging? So really trying to keep an eye on that end goal. With that, I don't know, Alexander, if you're able to track kind of who came in first, and we'll try to answer questions.
Yeah, it looks like the first here is Ken Dragoon.
Hi, Ken Dragoon, Renewable Hydrogen Alliance. I just wanted to ask whether this effort will at all address potentially refueling fuel cell electric vehicles. We have more and more electric utilities in the Northwest, Douglas County PUD, Tacoma Power, Union Water and Electric Board, interested in using renewable electricity to make hydrogen. And so these fuel cell electric vehicles are electric vehicles. And the Western Governors Association has included hydrogen fueling infrastructure as part of their transportation electrification infrastructure plan. I was just wondering whether that's a possibility for this effort, and if not, whether there might be a follow-on effort to look at hydrogen fueling infrastructure.
And Amanda, I just wanted to interject that we were trying to hold public comment till the end, Ken, and just hear from members of the committee because we have really limited time for their conversation. But I'll leave that to you, Amanda, whether we should move on to the next.
Yeah. So Ken, I would just mention real quickly, and Mary can speak to later when there's time, we do have plans to look a little bit at hydrogen. The focus of the study right now is to meet the requirements set forth in the executive order first and foremost, but we do have an element that we've scoped for hydrogen as well. So with that, let's go to V. V, do you have a question?
Yeah, thank you, Amanda. And thanks, Mary, for the overview. I just had a quick question on the engagement and outreach strategies. Is there a plan to provide kind of a stipend in case like folks want to apply for a stipend for their time for engagement? And I say that too, just considering looking at the advisory group and seeing that there aren't a lot of folks from these spaces. And since we're all getting paid from our time from our work, I was just thinking about that and making sure that there's people who are providing their time are compensated. Thanks.
Yeah, so Via, maybe I'll take that question. That's a great question. So the TEINA study is also part of some multi-agency efforts that we're undertaking called Every Mile Counts to address climate considerations among 4 state agencies, ODOT, Department of Environmental Quality, Department of Energy, and Department of Land Conservation Development. We actually have a workshop coming up that we'll be hosting in early December around equity engagement so that we can talk about that more broadly across. We're providing stipends to some folks to participate in that meeting, and that will be a big topic of conversation there is like how can we get the different and diverse voices to the table when maybe their company or they're not able to make the meeting otherwise. So we'll be looking into those opportunities to help either offer stipends or some other kind of way to help people participate.
Thank you.
Okay, so that's all I see for hands raised of committee members. So maybe if we can go to the next slide, please.
Yes.
Okay, so as Stacy mentioned at the start of the meeting, we had sent out a roles, responsibilities, and meeting guidelines document. So this is really just setting the ground rules for the committee, not only for you members as participants, but also us as staff on how we commit to providing things to you in a timely manner. So we'll be providing materials to you at least a week ahead of time. We've created a website in which we posted committee materials, and that way if anyone wants to go back and review things, we can do that. I think maybe if Mary or somebody can post that web link in the chat box so that everyone has access to that, that would be great. So a few things that just are covered in this document. As you participate on this group, we're really looking for you to represent your subject matter expertise, perspectives of your industry or your constituents. And really, this is a statewide effort. So while you may represent a certain specific geographic area of the state, we are looking for you to kind of bring those perspectives up to that statewide level and say, how do we address this kind of as that overarching perspective? As I mentioned, we'll send materials about a week ahead of time, so hopefully you'll have an opportunity to read those and come prepared into those meetings. As you'll see on the next slide, which I'll go into in a minute, we are only having a couple meetings, I think 3 meetings after this one, so we're going to be covering a lot of material in a short amount of time. So the more prepared that we can all come to those conversations, the better. And we'll look for opportunities to solicit feedback ahead of time too, so we can come up with some major themes into each meeting and make sure that we have time and space to talk about those. Always important as we facilitate conversations, and I think my role as the facilitator is to making sure that everybody gets equal opportunity to share their perspectives. Some of us are more shy than others, so I just encourage you to try to speak out and feel comfortable in this space. Others tend to be talkers among the group, so just maybe taking a pause and letting others contribute or seeing what other comments there might be. Just to note that there may be some media inquiries from time to time in regard to this project. If you can direct those to ODOT, Mary or myself specifically, that would be great. And the intent of this group is really advisory, so it's not necessarily making a consolidated recommendation at the end of the day. So we're not seeking consensus. What we're seeking is really feedback from everybody else. Ideally, we want to hear some similar themes, and we're really going to try to listen and adapt to those. So the role of the advisory committee is really to inform us along the way, and as I mentioned earlier, that means after this meeting, it's going to be a lot more of you talking than us talking. We're just trying to do the orientation right now, but we really are looking towards your feedback to help guide us on where we need to go. I think as Mary alluded to, the world of transportation electrification, even just focusing on infrastructure is pretty large, and helping us to narrow that down to those key elements will be really, really helpful. So next slide. So we'll do that through these next advisory committees that we have planned out. So you'll see the meeting dates listed there. If we see any significant problem with any of the meeting dates, we can adjust those as we get closer. We just wanted to get them on the calendar so that we have that time reserved. The dates really align with when we think we'll have some key deliverables ready and developed. So the next meeting, so what we'll talk about today later is information on some of the scenarios as well as existing conditions. So we'll have a more fleshed out information by January, talk about those trends and what we're seeing as part of the landscape today. Then in March, we'll review the outcomes of the scenarios on that path for how do we get to that Senate Bill 1044 goals that Mary shared earlier. What are the potential ways that we could potentially get there? And what does that mean for starting to think about our policy options and our recommendations going forward, and really soliciting your input as part of that. And then by May, trying to get the draft report pulled together, take your input so that we can have that finalized by the end of June. And then as I alluded to in response to one of the questions we got a few minutes ago, there will be some follow-up work as part of that. So we had the consultant team engaged to develop that report to meet the executive order deadline. But we also recognize that there's probably going to be some other pieces that pop up or known work like hydrogen that we want to spend a little bit more time looking into. So we anticipate some work extending beyond June. Not necessarily needing the engagement of this advisory committee, but as we talk throughout that process, and if there's interest in engaging, we're more than happy to have some of those conversations as well. Next slide. So with that, I get to turn it over to our fabulous consulting team, who will share with you some of the work that they've already done to get a sense of what's out there, where we're heading, and to have that conversation.
Thank you, Amanda. Before Wayne speaks, I want to make sure I introduce someone that's going to be speaking that got left off our list. Xin Lee from Rocky Mountain Institute you'll be hearing from soon, and will introduce himself then. So sorry, Amanda, I just wanted to get that in.
No, that's great.
Thank you.
And I assume there were no questions on the committee directives. I'm seeing no hands. So, okay, with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Wayne. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. And hello again, everyone. I'm Wayne Kittleson, and let me introduce you to a quick overview of where our project team is with respect to existing conditions assessment. So as we continue to develop our understanding of baseline conditions, here's an incomplete overview of Oregon's EV landscape. Starting on the outside and beginning with the vision goals and regional planning circle in the upper left, you can see that Oregon has a very robust program with a lot of collaboration across the western states and even throughout the nation. Moving a little to the right, a lot of the state agencies are also very active, as you can see, with numerous initiatives underway by each of those agencies and a lot of interagency cooperation as well. Local leadership is also evident in a number of cities that seem to be leading the way for local communities in Oregon. Eugene has a particularly strong program that is simultaneously addressing all of the key barriers to transportation, electrification, implementation that I'll mention here in just a minute. The other outer circles document the ongoing work of many other entities, including transit agencies, the NGOs, the EVSEs, utilities, and others. And all of this gets kind of wrapped together through the work of the 3 integrator entities identified in that interior circle. Next slide, please. So 7 different, in terms of the barriers to electrification, 7 different barriers have been identified that must be overcome one way or another as Oregon moves forward in its transportation electrification efforts. The 4 barriers grouped together on the left are barriers that can and are being addressed at the state and even at the local levels. The 3 barriers grouped together on the right are barriers that are more ubiquitous, I should say, and need to be addressed at a broader and even more national level. Can't really just be addressed at the state level. So the focus of most of the work that's being done within Oregon's EV landscape right now is centered around those 4 barriers identified on the left. And of course, the infrastructure barrier is the primary focus of this particular project. Next slide, please. Graphically, this graphic kind of shows where the key electrification corridors are located throughout the state, as well as some of the most active cities. I believe that something like 70% of Oregon's population resides in the western third of the state, and as you'll see in subsequent slides and from other presenters, that's also where the preponderance of electrification activities seem to be focused. Now I'm going to ask Lynn Daniels of Rocky Mountain Institute to speak a little bit more detail about some of the ongoing infrastructure-related activities that we've documented thus far. Lynn?
All right, thank you. So yeah, move to the next slide, please, Stacy. All right, so what we've done is we've started to catalog all of the funded infrastructure projects and activities that we've been able to identify in Oregon, which are primarily being driven by the state agencies and the utilities in the state. So if we sum up all of the funding we found, it's somewhere between 20 and 21 million. And I'll caution that includes only funding we've been able to identify. And this is what we're kind of categorizing as infrastructure activities. This is deployments, so actually procuring, installing, and getting EV charging stations in the ground. And it can also be programs that utilities offer for rebates for EV charging stations at home, things like that. So almost an even split, about 50%, 55% is the utility funding, and about 45% of that is from the state agencies. And then on the next slide, we try to break down that funding as best we can into where it is being focused geographically. So you'll see a large amount of it is being focused on cities and urban areas. A good chunk on some of the corridors in the state. That's primarily $4 million for the West Coast Electric Highway. And then statewide, so I just want to, again, provide a little caveat here. This is primarily driven by Pacific Power's investments because of their service territory is a bit broader and encompasses different areas of the state. We sort of bucketed that as statewide. But one key takeaway is there's very little exclusively rural funding being put out there. And again, we recognize a lot of the consumer-owned utilities and smaller utilities in the state do offer rebates for EV charging infrastructure. We've not been able to find the total funding for those programs, so that's not included here. But other than that, we've not really been able to identify any rural exclusive investments. And then on the next slide, we'll get away from the quantitative here a little bit. And prior to this conversation we're having today, I had the great pleasure of interviewing many of our advisory group members for their assessment of what Oregon is doing well and what needs to improve and what they want to see out of this study. And I've tried to condense as best as I can a lot of those takeaways. And I'll start on the upper left corner in the green box. You know, when we asked, one of the questions we asked was, what do you want to see out of this study? What would make it successful? And most people said almost the same things as, it needs to be actionable. We need to have milestones to get us from A to B, get us from here to there. We really need to identify who needs to do what. Roles and responsibility is really key. And emphasize the fact that the state of Oregon is very broadly diverse. Rural areas, urban areas, suburban corridors. the messaging and how we package this in different geographic regions and to different constituencies needs to be different, and we need to recognize that and emphasize that. In general, there was a sense that to meet these aggressive transportation electrification goals, a whole lot more funding is needed. That's not the only thing that's needed, but it's really needed to support the deployment of a lot of this infrastructure. Primarily, I think at first blush, public funding is going to be a real driver here. In particular, the private sector, of course, needs to provide investment, but they're starting to look a lot more closely at the energy costs, and they want to make sure that they're going to start either making a profit or getting closer to having charging stations pencil out. And so we need to see more public funding available, especially in areas where chargers might be lower utilization and more difficult to get cost recovery there. So the rest of the comments here, I broke down sort of the way I've been discussing this into what the state and cities should be thinking about, what we should be thinking about in terms of corridors and on the rural side, just important takeaways for those different geographies. At the state level and the cities, really start engaging cities and even counties earlier. We heard, there's a real opportunity to leverage them as your key feedback mechanisms and to be the messenger of the message. So it's not only the message that's important, but who delivers that message. So working with county commissioners, for example, came up as a key way to really disseminate this message, especially into the rural communities. A lot of the investment today is really focused on a few use cases: residential at-home charging, public charging on corridors. We need to really explore other use cases. I know that's a key part of the study, but just wanted to emphasize that here. And then getting away from chicken and egg. We heard this a couple times, was don't just install enough infrastructure to meet the need of today, but recognize that availability and accessibility of charging infrastructure is a driver for more EV adoption. So don't, actually get ahead of where we think EV adoption will be and make sure there's suitable electric infrastructure out there. On the corridor side, sort of what I just mentioned earlier, charging is not profitable today, especially DC fast charging, which we need a lot more of. So this is where states and utilities can step in, own and operate charging infrastructure in areas with great need but low utilization, and for utilities to continue to explore rate design to make the energy costs such that there's a profitable business case for DC fast charging. And many people recognize there's a lot of legacy chargers on the Oregon corridors. A lot of them are broken. It ruins the user experience. So that has to be front and foremost. As we're building out this infrastructure network, it's not a one-time thing. It has to be maintained over time. And lastly, on the rural side, Clean Fuels program has stood out from all of these interviews as just an incredible asset to Oregon. It is a lifeline to a lot of the rural COUs and PUDs to actually invest in transportation electrification. The IOUs in the state have significant investments using this funding. So it's an incredible asset for the state. Really need to make sure we're continuing to leverage that. And then specific to the rural communities, the message here can't be really about emissions, can't be about climate change. We recognize it's a very sensitive political topic. It really is about the other benefits of EVs, the economic development side, the pocketbook issues need to be front and center. So hopefully captured some really great takeaways from the interviews. And now I'll turn it over to Shen to dive a little deeper into the existing infrastructure that's out there.
Thank you, Wayne and Lynn. Hello, everyone. I'm Shen from RMI. I will be a consultant and modeler in this project. So after having a high-level overview of this project, let's move one step further. In order to perform the forecast and future analysis, knowing the starting point is really important. So let's take a look at the EV and charger in the state of Oregon as of today. So first, let's look at how many EVs and where they are. So by July 2020, there are around 22,000 zero-emission vehicles statewide. Around 2/3 of them are battery EVs, and the rest of them are plug-in hybrids. Most of the ZEVs are registered around Portland and surrounding areas. In addition, the EV adoption trend is actually skyrocketing recently. For example, the BEV battery electric vehicle registration has increased by 15 times over the past 5 years, which is very significant. This trend will likely continue growing as the climate goals rolling out and other measures taken into place. Next slide, please. Yep. Once we are clear on the vehicles, so what is the existing charging infrastructure to support them? The colorful dots indicate the locations of different types of chargers. There are 2 patterns we can extract from this map. So first of all, the chargers are along major travel corridors, for example, US 101 and I-5. And secondly, we can see that the dots are actually pretty dense in Portland area. So this actually indicates that the charger density is high in Portland area, which aligns with our understanding that where the EVs are registered now. Next slide, please. Next page, please.
Do you see it says Shin? I'm on the next slide.
Yeah, next slide, please.
I think Shen's internet connection has become unstable. He can't see that the slide changed.
Okay.
I see. Can you guys hear me still?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, I can move on. Everything is in my mind now. So next, let's dig into different types of chargers. So statewide, we have around 900 public charging locations. You can go and plug in charging directly. So each location will likely have multiple plugs. So we have over 2,000 charging plugs altogether, including level 1, level 2, and DCFC. Of course, level 1 is the slowest one, level 2 is faster, and then DCFC is the fastest charging equipment so far. And the majority of the existing chargers are level 2, and less than 30% of locations actually have DCFC currently. Moving on to the next slide, please. And then let's calculate some per unit values. So if we take all public chargers into consideration, we have 14 ZeV per plug statewide. And level 2, as the main component of the charging infrastructure, is 18 ZeV per plug. And DCFC can be 60 ZeV per plug. So, and also please note that some DCFC chargers are exclusive for certain models. For example, Tesla chargers can only serve Tesla models exclusively, and that's why our current estimate is actually conservative. The DCFC available to the general public could be a smaller amount in reality. In addition, we also cherry-picked and plot ZeV per plug by utility service territory in some popular regions to have a flavor of distribution at this moment. The utilities listed here are part of the pioneers to have relatively big amount of chargers in their service territories in order to support the ongoing local EV adoption. So we actually see a wide distribution from 5 to 35 ZeV per plug across the arena. So we will conduct more in-depth analysis in the later study. Now, please allow me to pass it to my colleague, Chris, to go over what scenario analysis we are going to perform later.
Great, thanks very much, Shen. So what I'm going to do is give you a quick introduction to the way that we're going to approach the scenarios, and then we're going to ask you to focus in and give us some feedback on those in the breakout sessions. So before I describe the scenarios, I just want to mention that our methodology here will start with a baseline understanding of what are the existing conditions of public charging infrastructure. So that's what Shen just showed you. And then we're going to try to take into account the factors that will influence when and where charging is going to occur now and then in the future. We're going to specifically identified differences between rural areas, travel corridors, urban areas, and we're going to take into consideration all the relevant factors we can think of in terms of like registration data, geography, travel patterns, land use data, commercial activities, local policies, so on and so forth. And then we're going to try to develop forecasts of ZEV adoption. And again, ZEV is zero emission vehicles over the next 15 years. And then we're going to try to break down that further into 9 specific drivers and use cases. So we really identify very carefully what kinds of vehicles, what are the use cases, where do they need to be, and from there we can help derive where does the charging infrastructure need to be to hit these targets on up to 2035. So we're going to approach this using 3 scenarios, and these scenarios are going to be essentially designed to reflect what are the economic conditions. And as we all know, COVID has had an enormous impact on the economic conditions of the entire world. And so we're going to take a very clear focus on the effect that COVID will have on the Oregon economy between now and 2035, and how that will affect the economic opportunity for people to adopt electric vehicles and for people to build charging infrastructure. So those scenarios will essentially, the first one is essentially a base case to say, you know, what if the trends that existed before COVID were to continue on into the future through 2035? The second will be sort of a rapid return to normal scenario that assumes that a vaccine or other efficacious therapy is found and widely deployed, such that the U.S. economy can quickly return to its previous vigor, let's say before 2022 or thereabouts. And then another scenario would be more of a slow recovery scenario in which economic activity remains depressed through 2025 before quickly recovering. And so, again, all of these scenarios will contemplate all vehicle classes. There will be an emphasis on light-duty vehicles, and all of the scenarios will need to essentially hit that 2035 target established by the legislature. And then we're going to try to quantify the charging infrastructure needed at the 3 milestones of 2025, 2030, and 2035. So that's a very quick introduction to the scenarios and how we're going to approach this. And so as we go into the breakout sessions, we're going to ask you to give us some feedback on whether these scenarios make sense, if they're realistic, if they're helpful, will they help the government and other stakeholders really understand the challenges that they're going to face over the next 15 years as we try to meet the SB 1044 targets. And then also we're going to ask you to give us some feedback on the charging infrastructure. You know, who's going to build it, and be as specific as possible. And then what impediments do we need to address to enable all of these different entities to do their parts. So with that, I think we toss it to Stacy to lead us into the breakout sessions.
Thank you, Chris. Yes. Let me go to the next slide. So what we're going to do is we have some groups. The team is going to be thrown into these 4 different rooms with a facilitator and a note taker. We'll have, I think we should, about 25 minutes, Alexander, give us to have our conversations. And then we're going to come back to the group to have some report outs. We're going to be asking for some volunteers to help us to report back to the larger group. And for the public, you're going to be having to wait for us, kind of similar to an in-person meeting when we're going to other rooms or different corners of the room. But we will be back. If you're watching the recording, we will edit out this dead air. But please feel free to join us in about 20, 25 minutes.
analysis around the impact of the COVID pandemic on EV adoption, but we should be careful in how that is done and presented, that it does not provide the picture that EV growth will be slowed so much that investment isn't needed. And so it should just be put in good context that EV adoption and EV growth continues. It's a question of just how much COVID impacts pace and some slight delay, but clearly that investment is still needed in infrastructure.
Okay, I think I caught the tail end of that one. Hopefully others were able to hear better than I, so apologize for any connectivity issues we're having. So next, Zachariah, do you or someone from your group want to report out in the first question?
Yeah, thank you, Amanda. We had Juan identified as someone to report out. Juan, are you available to share? Hopefully no technical issues.
Yeah, no, I think those are.
Great, we
so
can hear you.
I'm gonna try. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I'm gonna try to remember what was said. I apologize because of those technical issues. I may have missed some of it. So scenario 1 was somewhat unrealistic, and we opted for scenario 2. Scenario 2 and 3 seem to be reasonable, but scenario 2 seemed to be the one that everybody was agreeing with. COVID does have an impact. Although I would argue that vehicle ownership has not been affected as much in our service territory, because I think you're looking at a different market of those who are able to buy an electric vehicle at this time. Still remain those who still have a job and their jobs are a little bit more secure than underserved populations. We had a 24% increase in EVs adoption as of June, which is pretty interesting considering everything that is happening. A focus on disadvantaged communities, and it was mentioned that level 2 charging is a good solution for rural, but I think in a more metro area, DC fast charging can play also a critical role for ride-hailing and multifamily because use of the expense of multifamily and upgrading capacity to put in charging infrastructure. If you have somewhat ample DC fast charging, people can go there and charge and get what they need done. Zachariah, I may have missed some, if there's anything that you could add. You had some fantastic notes, but this is what I can remember at this time. And I think Thomas mentioned some other things as well, and I apologize that I'm just not remembering those details. So I would ask the group if they have anything else that I missed, please add at this time.
And really, we're just asking for really high level stuff. So it's okay if you don't have everything. We will get everything to our note takers. So don't feel the pressure.
Okay, thanks for that.
Yeah,
Okay,
I think
so
Juan
with that,
covered it.
oh, go ahead.
I was just saying, I think Juan covered it really well, and we can discuss the second question next.
Okay, perfect. So Jessica, how about you or someone from your group reporting out?
Sure. We asked if Judge Farrar would report out for our group, and I and/or Wayne would probably be happy to help out if needed.
Yeah, so we thought the scenarios looked reasonable. I think the group generally discussed about how, you know, COVID definitely will change the landscape, but how those impacts will play out longer term is still, I think, an open question that's difficult to predict. And so we talked about the importance of having sort of the spectrum of scenarios that can really drive different policy options depending on, you know, what happens with the vaccine and how the economy responds. So I think we felt that overall, you know, having those three different scenarios was important just because there's still so many unanswered questions about not just how the economy will respond, but also how people's behavior may change post-COVID. You know, if telecommuting continues to be a thing, you know, maybe there are fewer people on the roads, maybe they're not putting as many miles on their cars and not changing, you know, buying at the same tempo that they would normally. I mean, all of those things are still yet to be seen. So, but overall, we thought that the three scenarios were reasonable.
Great, thank you. So for my group, clearly I did a horrible job facilitating because I'm stuck with reporting out, but I'll hit the high points. So we first discussed whether COVID was the right driving factor to things, and I think ultimately settled on yes, in one manner or another, the economy is key to figuring out kind of the ramp up of electrification in the state. And that's going to look different in different areas, whether you're urban or maybe have a little bit of a lag time in some of the more rural areas. The economy is a key driving factor. The other thing that we talked about is there's just a number of variables that are super important. And Chris was in our group and affirmed that the consultant team is going to be looking across several variables that impact the future, not just the economic, but also things like technology, whether the types of vehicles that are out there, the range of them, looking at the political landscape and what appetite is out there, potential funding for some of these things, as well as regulation kind of contributing to tipping points and other factors. So there's a number of variables that play into that will be a key, but having kind of those economic lens as one of the key driving factors probably makes sense. And in some manner or another, whether you have 3 or 2 scenarios, something that is a low case scenario and a high case scenario makes sense. Okay, so we'll move to the second question. And the second question was really around roles and responsibilities, trying to get some specifics about the different entities, what they can do to contribute to transportation electrification infrastructure charging. So we'll try to do a roundtable again. I know this certainly is a meaty topic. It was for my group. We only kind of hit the tip of the iceberg on it. I think I'll go ahead and turn it back to Jessica, your group, and whomever you want to report for that particular question.
Sorry, I couldn't figure out how to unmute myself. So this is Jessica. I'll hand it over to Judge Farr again. And when she gets done, I might add a little bit about the government perspective, because we didn't really get around to talking about that particular bullet point. Go ahead.
Yeah, so one of the key points that I thought was really helpful was a member of our group had suggested that we were actually missing a potential partner, and that would be the traditional gas station companies, that as more consumers switch to EV, they're going to be looking at additional revenue streams and things like that, and that they may be part of the solution as well. And so I wanted to flag that as maybe a partner to add to the list. I think that our group felt that all of the entities have a role to play. We talked about needing to have the right mix of regulations from the government perspective, not just adopting sort of the fossil fuel model and trying to adopt that, but actually really looking at this as a separate entity and making sure that regulations make sense. We did think that from the automakers' perspective, aside from Tesla, we didn't see the automakers really putting a lot of investment behind the actual infrastructure, that theirs would be more of a driving demand for the products, so less of an infrastructure component. And looking at profitability for sort of the private investment, I think, was another big thing. We had just sort of gotten started on this. I think we probably could have talked a lot longer on it, but those were sort of the highlights. And I'll turn it over to you, Jessica, if you want to add more on the government side.
Just very quickly, I think that government has a really valuable role to play in helping to streamline some of the regulatory practices. I think permitting is a thing that comes up quite frequently, and also helping to provide information and expertise that will help inform a lot of the work that goes on, so that everybody's on the same page and feels very comfortable with what the processes are. So that's my quick high-level overview on government's role. And back to Amanda.
Great, thank you, Jessica. Zachariah, anyone from your group?
Yeah, thanks again, Amanda. So I'll preface this by saying we had some early technical issues and didn't really get a chance to dive into the second question. That said, I'll turn it over to Juan again to see if he has any thoughts on that question about who's going to build the charging infrastructure and what the roles are of various participants. And if he doesn't, then I can sort of summarize some more of the comments that our group came up with.
Yeah, thank you. I have a lot to talk about this, so I'm going to try to be quick. I think utilities need to provide a DC fast charging rate structure that lets go of traditional demand rates and looks more at the actual model for DC fast charging. I think utilities should look outside of their territory and look at a regional investment approach where a neutral entity, kind of like the county, is being funded so they can put infrastructure where it makes sense. My customers benefit from charging infrastructure outside of my service territory so they can travel and not so much, at least for the traditional EV owner currently. And utilities and municipalities need to look at a complete solution that is provided for charging infrastructure. So municipalities can drive kind of like a stick with code or requirements, and utilities can provide a rebate so that you put the customer in a why wouldn't I situation. There's a requirement, the city is expediting permitting for me, and the utility is giving me this rebate plus education from the utility on assessing capacity and different things. So why wouldn't I do this now? And I think there's a lot that I could blab about, but I think those would be some of the points that I would stress. It needs to be a partnership. It can't just be the utility or the municipality. They need to get together to make sure that you're providing a complete solution. Look at a regional approach, use your clean fuel credits to put into some neutral fund where a neutral entity, again, like the county, is putting that infrastructure where it makes sense. So whether it happens to be 2 in Eugene and 4 in another service territory, that's perfectly fine because it helps the overall effort. It doesn't have to be rate payer money. So it can be, again, clean fuels, which is intended for this kind of purpose, that you use this for a regional approach. And I think by county would make a lot of sense, and that would cover some of the rural needs as well. With that, that's it for me. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Juan. Great questions, or great answers to the questions here. So Mary, anything new and different? I'm just kind of looking at time. Anything new or different coming out of your group that you or your person reporting out want to share?
Yeah, I think Jamie Hall can just give a real quick update.
Yeah, so quickly, we generally agree it's got to be all the above. The business models are still evolving here and still challenged in many of the use cases. So the private sector is stepping up and the charging companies are investing. This we agree will not be enough. Definitely a role for utilities and utility regulators, both for direct investment, and there are lots of different ways for that to roll out, but also for rate design to help make a business case. And then an important role for the state in either directly funding infrastructure, putting in place reasonable rules, and reducing permitting and other soft costs that slow things down and make this more expensive than it needs to be. So since we're short on time, I'll just leave it there.
Great, thank you, Jamie. And again, as was mentioned earlier, we had note takers in each session, so we're trying to keep copious notes, and we have a lot more details than we're able to do in the report out here. For my group, kind of similar themes that you've heard thus far. We probably spent most of our time on the utilities. I see a comment from Angry Fish on the chat function as well, that utilities are a big player here. But we also talked about kind of that nexus of utilities working with state agencies on funding, on going in areas where it may not pencil out because of demand yet, and that some of the rural utilities in particular can help play a role in key corridors within some of those more rural areas. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Stacy to see if there's any closing thoughts on the report out, but I just appreciate everybody's time in this and great conversations that were had. I feel like we could have gone on for a couple hours actually talking about some of these issues in more depth.
I agree, Amanda. There's never enough time, is there? I think we are ready to move to public comment, actually. And Alexander, is there just one person who's commenting? Is that correct?
Yes, the only person I have who would like to comment is Ken Dragoon with the Renewable Hydrogen Alliance.
And Ken, if you could make a 2-minute comment, that would be wonderful.
Sure, thank you. I guess you can probably guess what my comment is. Zero emission vehicles should include fuel cell electric vehicles. The hydrogen can be produced from locally sourced renewable electricity. Eugene Water and Electric Board has a plan to be doing that soon. Fuel cell electric vehicles are electric vehicles if the hydrogen comes from electricity, and they have some characteristics that are quite favorable in some applications, which I would expect for light duty vehicles would especially pertain to rural areas where distances are greater, and the battery vehicles have gotten greater ranges, but they have an awfully long recharge time. So fuel cell electric vehicles could be quite significant there. But I point this out. I know we don't have fueling stations now. We don't have hydrogen vehicles now, but they are coming, because the more we depend on wind and solar, the more we're going to have these super surpluses of electricity that we're going to want to do something with other than throw it away. And we're going to be making hydrogen, and transportation is a great way to use it.
Thank you, Ken. Amanda, did you want to talk about next steps?
Sure. So thanks, Ken, for the comments. Like we mentioned earlier, public comments, we'll have a sign-up process for future meetings, and then we'll take public comments ahead of time, make sure that gets out to the committee, and if we can, share highlights during our public comment piece so that we're kind of reviewing those live as we go through. Later on, as we move through the process, probably closer to the final report, we may have a couple public comment periods in the meeting so that we can have some earlier on before the committee deliberates on the topic, and then later on in response to kind of how the deliberation played out. So moving forward, a lot of work that the consultants are undertaking. So you saw a preview of some of the existing conditions, of the lay of the land of who's doing what out there relative to transportation electrification. That's part of a bigger study that we've been undertaking, but then looking specifically towards charging infrastructure now, going over and meeting with several stakeholders and really listening to their interests, needs, concerns, challenges, and more through listening sessions. Mary put a list up earlier. I would just remind folks that we will be posting this PowerPoint to the website. So if you want to go back and say, okay, wait, who were you going to talk to again? You can flip through the PowerPoint and it shows that. If you have any concerns or suggestions of people in particular we talked to as part of that and you're a committee member, please feel free to forward some ideas to Mary and the project team.
Amanda?
Then we'll be developing, yes.
We have a couple minutes. When you wrap up here, Zachariah did chat that he has a couple public comments that he received prior to the meeting that he can read, but I will let you finish up here and we'll finish with Zachariah's public comment.
Okay, great, thank you. So we'll develop some straw proposals based on the scenarios that we talked about today, and then meet again in January. For the most part, we'll be looking at meeting in the morning hours. However, we recognize that some folks don't like starting right at 8 a.m., so we'll try to stagger the start time a little bit. Again, we have 3 meetings coming up. We'll keep all materials from each meeting on the website so that you can go back and look at materials if you need to, including a record of the public comments we receive. So with that, Zachariah, do you want to go ahead and share what we've heard?
Yeah, sounds good. And so I received 2 emails this past week regarding the TEINA study, and we shared we'd report back to the full advisory group or share these comments to the full advisory group. So I won't read them verbatim, given the amount of time we have, but I'll do my best to summarize accurately here. So from Sam Coe, Sam recommends that rest stops along freeways should have fast charging capabilities, and then they discuss the difference between charging ports and the need to have diversity there. Motels and hotels should have multiple fast charging ports, including level 2. Work sites with 50 or more employees should have fast charging capabilities, and apartment condo complexes should have at least level 2 fast charging as well. And then from Captain Peter Wilcox, received an email from Peter mentioning that he is on the engineering team for Frog Ferry, a commuter passenger ferry service based in the Portland metro area. They will have stops from Vancouver to all the way to Oregon City. I believe they will have 5 to 7 initial vessels that will be hybrids, and then I think ideally they look to have a full route of electric propulsion, and they encourage ODOT and TEINA to consider shoreside charging infrastructure for such transportation. And that's it.
Thank you, Sakurai. Again, we'll make sure those comments are shared with you on the website as well. We want to thank you for your time. I know we're a minute over. Our goal is really to try to keep these things tight. There's obviously a lot of information to cover. So we look forward to working with you, and thank you for sticking with us throughout this meeting and through some of our technical difficulties. Have a great day, and we look forward to seeing you again in January. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.